In Ridgeview, Georgia, life moved slowly, wrapped in the warmth of summer days and the hum of quiet streets. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else and secrets didn't last long. But one name that always brought a smile was Tiana Brooks. At just 18, she was known for her kindness, ambition, and bright future. Teachers often said she had the heart of a healer, and her dream was to become a nurse. She wanted to lift people out of pain the same way she had lifted her family through their struggles. Her mother, Elaine Brooks, had raised her alone after Tiana's father left when she was only 4. Money was always tight, but love was never in short supply. Elaine worked 2 jobs, determined to keep her daughter focused on school and away from the dangers that lurked around the edges of their small town. For a while it worked. Tiana was a good student, stayed out of trouble, and had plans for college. Everything seemed to be heading in the right direction until she met Derek Miles. Derek was older, charming, and reckless, the kind of person who could make danger seem exciting. To Tiana, he represented freedom from her predictable life, but soon that thrill turned into chaos. Late-night drives became secret trips, and small lies grew into serious trouble. When Derek convinced her to drive a car he claimed belonged to his cousin across state lines, she didn't hesitate. Only after they were stopped by police did she learn it had been stolen. Tiana tried to explain she didn't know, but the evidence was stacked against her. Derek disappeared, leaving her to take the blame. The judge was sympathetic but firm. She was sentenced to 18 months in a juvenile correctional facility. For Elaine, it was devastating. For Tiana, it felt like the end of everything she had worked for. Inside the correctional facility, the days were long and rigid. The building's gray walls felt cold and permanent, a world away from the life she had imagined. But she refused to let the system break her. Tiana took classes, earned her GED, and volunteered to help other girls who struggled to read or write. Counselors praised her progress, and staff members described her as one of the few who genuinely wanted to change. As her release date drew closer, she began counting the days with quiet excitement. Each sunrise meant she was one step closer to freedom. She talked often about her plans, going home, enrolling in nursing school, and helping her mother pay off debts. Everyone around her admired her resilience. To them, Tiana's story was one of redemption and second chances. But beneath her calm smile, there was unease she never spoke of. Whispers in the dorm, missing girls, and strange late-night noises from the infirmary had started to disturb her. She brushed them off, eager to go home. No one, not even Tiana, could have imagined that her final 24 hours inside those walls would lead to a tragedy that would shock the entire town. As the date of her release came closer, Tiana's behavior began to shift in small but noticeable ways. She was still polite and helpful, but the energy in her eyes had dimmed. She was often tired, sometimes dizzy, and had started skipping meals. The correctional staff assumed it was nerves about returning home, but one nurse, Ms. Latham, sensed something more serious. After Tiana fainted during her morning cleaning duty, the nurse insisted on running a few medical tests. A few days later, the results came back, and what she discovered left her frozen. Tiana Brooks, just 18 years old and still serving time, was 3 months pregnant. Ms. Latham immediately reported it to the facility director, but instead of concern, she was met with cold instructions. Do not document it officially. Within a week, the nurse was transferred to another division. No one spoke of it again, and Tiana was told her test results were inconclusive. But Tiana already knew the truth. She had been feeling the changes in her body for weeks. She couldn't understand how this had happened in a facility with no male inmates and no private contact with men other than guards and staff. Fear began to consume her nights. She stopped participating in group activities and spent her time sitting by the window, staring at the sky beyond the fences. Some of the other girls whispered that she looked sick. Others claimed they'd seen her sneaking into the infirmary at odd hours. The prison administration seemed desperate to hide her condition. Her scheduled checkups were quietly removed from the record, and when her mother, Elaine, called to ask how her daughter was doing, she was told Tiana had a minor illness, but nothing to worry about. Elaine felt uneasy but trusted that the system would take care of her daughter for just a little longer. Tiana's cellmate, a girl named Shonda, later said she had seen Tiana crying one night, clutching her stomach and whispering prayers under her breath. When asked what was wrong, Tiana only said, "I just want to go home." Shonda thought she meant freedom, but there was something in her tone, a quiet dread, that she didn't understand until later. Despite the fear, Tiana tried to keep herself together. She continued marking off the days on her calendar, waiting for the moment she could leave and tell her mother everything. She had even written a letter, sealed in an envelope and hidden inside her mattress, describing what she had been through. She planned to hand it to her mother the moment she was released. That final evening, she ate dinner in silence, pushing her food around the tray, but barely eating. She looked out across the common area, her eyes distant. She knew something wasn't right. For days, certain guards had been watching her too closely, and she could feel the tension in the air. It was as if everyone knew a secret they refused to say out loud. Before lights out, Tiana visited the small prison chapel and knelt in the back row. The dim light from the candles flickered across her face as she whispered her final prayer. Tomorrow she would walk free, or so she believed. What she didn't know was that her secret had already reached the wrong people, and before the next sunrise, her life would be stolen in the most brutal way imaginable. The morning of her last full day in the facility began like any other. The sun spilled through the narrow, barred window above Tiana's bed, painting the concrete walls in a faint golden glow. She woke early, folded her blanket neatly, and took a long look around her small cell. Everything she saw, the thin mattress, the scratched metal sink, the faint graffiti carved into the wall, was part of a life she was finally leaving behind. There were only 24 hours left until her release. Freedom felt close enough to touch. Tiana spent the morning in the facility library, flipping through worn magazines and sketching quietly in her notebook. Staff members said she seemed calm, almost peaceful. But those who looked closer noticed her shaking hands and pale face. When lunch came, she barely touched her food. At noon, a guard approached her table and said she had been scheduled for a routine medical check. It was unusual for her to be called in again, but she followed the order without protest. Surveillance cameras captured her walking down the hallway toward the infirmary at exactly 12:06 p.m. What happened inside that room remains unclear. Records later showed she stayed there for nearly 3 hours, far longer than a normal appointment. When she returned to the dorm, her shirt was inside out, her face looked strained, and her eyes were red. She didn't speak to anyone for the rest of the day. As evening came, the atmosphere in the dorm grew uneasy. Tiana sat on her bed with her notebook open, but didn't write anything. She asked one of the guards if she could make a phone call to her mother, saying she had something important to tell her. The request was denied because end-of-shift procedures had already begun. She nodded quietly, lay down, and stared at the ceiling for hours. Around 2 a.m., one of the facility cameras recorded a guard entering the dorm where Tiana slept. The footage from the next 30 minutes was mysteriously corrupted, showing only static and flickers of motion. No other camera captured what happened afterward. At 5:45 a.m., the morning count began. When guards reached Tiana's bed, they found her motionless under her blanket. A thin cord was wrapped tightly around her neck, her body cold and bruised. The alarm was sounded and staff rushed in, but it was too late. She was pronounced dead in her cell at 6:02 a.m., just hours before she was scheduled to walk free. The official report came quickly. The facility ruled her death a suicide, claiming she had been emotionally unstable due to the stress of release. But those who knew her didn't believe it. She had been planning her future, talking about college and dreaming of home. Nothing about the story made sense. Whispers spread among the inmates about strange noises that night, heavy footsteps in the hall, and a door that had been left unlocked. Staff members avoided questions, and the administration moved swiftly to close the case. Tiana Brooks's body was taken away before her mother even knew she was gone. For Elaine, the phone call came at dawn. The words "found deceased" echoed in her mind, shattering the hope she had been holding on to for months. No one could explain what had really happened inside that room. But one thing was clear, Tiana had not taken her own life. Something far darker had taken her from the world just hours before she could escape it. The announcement of Tiana's death hit Ridgeview like a storm. News spread quickly, and the small community that once praised her transformation now whispered about what really happened inside the correctional facility. Officials released a short statement claiming that Tiana had taken her own life due to emotional distress, but those who knew her refused to believe it. Her mother, Elaine, immediately demanded answers. She had spoken to her daughter only 2 days earlier, and Tiana had sounded hopeful and full of plans. Nothing about suicide made sense. Elaine insisted on an independent autopsy, and that decision would uncover truths the prison had tried to bury. The coroner's report revealed clear signs of foul play. The marks on Tiana's neck were inconsistent with self-strangulation, showing uneven pressure and deep bruising around the back of her head. There were also scratches on her arms and wrists, evidence of a struggle. Even more shocking, the report confirmed that Tiana had been 3 months pregnant at the time of her death. The question of who was responsible became impossible to ignore. DNA tests were quietly conducted, and the results pointed directly to Marcus Hale, a correctional officer who had worked in the facility for 6 years. He had been on duty the night Tiana died, and was one of the few guards seen entering her dorm during the missing footage window. His personnel file painted him as a model employee, but whispers from former inmates told a different story. Some said he manipulated vulnerable girls, offering them small privileges in exchange for silence. Others claimed complaints about him were always lost in the system. When confronted with the DNA evidence, Marcus denied everything. Before investigators could press further, he disappeared. His apartment was found abandoned with personal belongings still inside. His uniform and service badge were missing, and his car was discovered days later at the edge of a wooded area, doors unlocked and keys still in the ignition. Search teams combed through the forest but found no trace of him. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The facility's administration reacted quickly, trying to contain the situation. Files were sealed, employees were instructed not to speak to the media, and the warden issued a statement calling the investigation inconclusive. Behind the scenes, officers who had spoken up were transferred or dismissed. The prison security footage from that night was officially labeled corrupted beyond recovery. Despite the growing evidence, no one was charged. Local authorities claimed there wasn't enough proof to pursue a case, and state officials quietly closed the investigation months later. The facility itself was rebranded under a new name, and the staff roster was replaced almost entirely. Elaine refused to let her daughter's name fade into silence. She stood on courthouse steps, spoke to reporters, and demanded justice for Tiana. Each time, she was met with the same empty promise that the matter was under review. Behind every denial, she could feel the weight of a system protecting its own. The truth had been uncovered, but it had been buried just as quickly. To the outside world, Tiana Brooks' death was a closed case. To those who looked closer, it was clear. A young woman had been silenced for carrying the secret that could have destroyed the men who were supposed to protect her. A year passed, but time did nothing to dull Elaine Brooks's pain. Every morning she woke up expecting to hear her daughter's laughter from the next room, only to be met by silence. The world had moved on, but she refused to. The official story said Tiana had taken her own life, but Elaine knew that was a lie. Her daughter had been ready to start over. She had plans, dreams, and a life waiting for her outside those walls. Someone had stolen that from her, and Elaine was determined to find out who. She began her own search for the truth, collecting every article, document, and report she could find about the facility. Most of them told the same vague story, avoiding details about Tiana's pregnancy or the missing guard. But small clues kept surfacing, fragments of information from people who had once worked there. A former nurse confessed that she had been told to destroy Tiana's medical records. Another former inmate said the night before Tiana's death, guards were unusually tense, whispering among themselves. Each new piece painted a clearer picture of a cover-up too large to be coincidence. Elaine founded the Tiana Brooks Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to exposing abuse in juvenile facilities. Her persistence caught the attention of investigative journalist Karen Doyle, who agreed to reopen the case. Together, they filed public records requests, interviewed former employees, and began piecing together the chain of events leading to Tiana's final hours. Months of work led them to a sealed internal memo written the day before Tiana died. The memo referenced potential staff, misconduct, and instructed administrators to handle the matter, quietly and internally. The timing was chilling. Karen published her findings in a detailed expose that reignited public outrage. For a brief moment, it seemed justice might finally come. But just as the investigation gained traction, key evidence disappeared. Files went missing, Witnesses stopped responding, and state officials once again declared the case closed. It was as if someone had flipped a switch to make the truth vanish. Then, in early 2022, a construction crew renovating the now abandoned correctional facility stumbled upon something buried behind a wall in the old infirmary. Inside a small metal box was a phone, dusty, cracked, but still recoverable. When investigators examined it, they found it belonged to Marcus Hale, the missing guard. On the device were dozens of photos and videos of inmates taken in secret. Among them was footage of Tiana, clearly distressed, recorded just days before her death. The evidence was turned over to authorities, but before the files could be released publicly, the phone disappeared from the evidence locker. The official statement said it was lost in transport. No charges were filed and no new leads surfaced. For Elaine, it was another wound on top of too many others. Today, the site of the former facility is nothing but an empty field. Each year, Elaine visits the spot where the walls once stood, laying flowers in the dirt where her daughter's life ended. Reporters rarely come anymore, and the state refuses to reopen the case. But Elaine still whispers her daughter's name to the wind, refusing to let her be forgotten. The story of Tiana Brooks remains a haunting reminder of how easily the truth can be buried when power and silence work together. Her death was called a tragedy, but for those who knew her, it was more than that. It was a crime that was never meant to be solved.